Smithsonian World is brought to you by a company that's bringing the world closer together through leadership in communication. For business, for home, for today and tomorrow. Southwestern Bell Corporation.
This program is also made possible by the James S. McDonald Foundation of St. Louis, which supports significant programs in education, research to improve human life, and global understanding. Additional funding is provided by this and other public television stations and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Good evening. I'm David McCullough. Great families have figured large in American life since earliest times. This hour of Smithsonian World is a portrait of a great family in American art, or rather a portrait of an immensely vital American artist as told by his extraordinary children. Newell Converse Wyeth, N.C. Wyeth, was the creator of marvelous illustrations for a long shelf of classics. Robin Hood, Kidnapped, Treasure Island, The Last of the Mohicans. Like many Americans, I grew up with these books. As a boy, sick in bed with some childhood illness or other, free from school, I would pore over the pictures by the hour, utterly, wonderfully lost in their world. Here at the Brandywine River Museum in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, hang the originals, so much bigger than you would ever expect, full of light and dark and drama, so like the artist himself. But N.C. Wyeth produced another legacy, his 5 children. The best known is the youngest, Andrew Wyeth. The oldest, Henriette Wyeth Hurd, is also a painter, and her younger sister, Carolyn, is a painter. The oldest son, Nat, is an engineer who holds 23 patents. In fact, it was Nat Wyeth who invented the familiar plastic bottle for soft drinks. Anne Wyeth McCoy, the third daughter, is a musician and composer. All the music in this hour comes from her own compositions. In the galleries and exhibition halls of the Smithsonian hang portraits of all kinds of Americans who, with their creative spirit, have shaped our sense of the possibilities in life. This is a portrait in film. It's about growing up in an often magical household in which being creative and being alive were one and the same thing, and about the adored father whose influence is still felt long after his tragic death.
Treasure Island completed. I write that as though I were glad. In one way I am. To know that I pulled through the entire set of 17 canvases without one break in my enthusiasm and spirit. The result is I've turned out a set of pictures without doubt far better than anything I ever did.
The year 1911 was the best year ever for N.C. Wyeth. He had just completed the series of paintings for Treasure Island that established him as America's foremost illustrator at the age of 28. Working in the studio on the hill behind his house, he created a world of adventure and romance especially irresistible to children, including his own. NC was determined to keep alive the creative flame that burned so brightly in childhood. In long, thoughtful letters, he marveled at each of his children.
Henriette is astounding in her powers of perception and her sense of logical reasoning. She will do something in the way of creative work someday.
Whenever Pa would call for me, I was always so proud of him. He wore one of these great big hats. You've seen the pictures of him. And he would come into the room with this bouncing stride. And this way, and I think, there's just no one like my father.
The big noise is at home. Carolyn's an enthusiast, anarchist, pugilist, and an angel, all in one.
He did everything in a big way and not a small way. If he bought paint, he bought too much paint, which I do. Same damn thing. It's a better way to be than this very frugal. Do it in a big way.
And Nat, his enjoyment of every little thing is extremely touching.
He would have gone crazy over television. Those close-ups of these professional football games, my God. The action in those would have driven him through the ceiling.
Anne teems with irrepressible life and devilment. I am often awakened at dawn to the music of her humming.
I don't think he ever took lessons. And yet I think he could read some music. But he'd sit down most every morning, as I recall, over at the house at the grand piano and improvise. And boy, it would boom through the place. You know, it'd be delicate, sometimes great crashes. And at breakfast later, he'd say, I thought that sounded pretty good this morning.
I think Andrew's the most sensitive and spiritual little body I ever saw. Henriette said last night as she was looking into his face, he looks as though he were going to be a great composer or artist.
He was a man that was always overflowing. He used to say to me, he said, Andy, we must be like a sponge. Sponge it up, soak it up, but be sure you squeeze it out every once in a while.
I wish I could show you some of the home movies where he would twist his face into terribly grotesque, and he'd really act the part, He'd look like Quasimodo or something you've never seen before. You can always tell when Pa had the movie camera because it was usually aimed at the ocean. He never got tired of the waves rolling in on particularly the rock-bound coast of Maine. We've got thousands of feet. Anything that involved tremendous force, he'd go over and spend hours over there just watching it, absorbing it. It just fascinated him.
Everybody used to laugh when the movies would come back. Here was Pa pointing over to that island or pointing down here. Look at this, look at that.
He was always, isn't that marvelous? That's bully, that kind of thing. And his eyes were very wonderful, gray-blue eyes, very expressive. Wonderful head. Very high voice, and always didn't seem to go with his, bigness. However, when he called us, if we were out playing and we had to come to dinner, we never were sure whether it was the train coming down the valley or Pa calling us.
The Wyeths made their home in southeastern Pennsylvania, in the little crossroads town of Chadds Ford, in the beautiful, historic valley of the Brandywine River.
My attachment to this place is beyond words. Among those misty gray hills of Chadds Ford and those big sad trees and humble stone farmhouses, there is that spirit which exactly appeals to the deepest appreciation of my soul. To me, it is all like wonderfully soft and liquid music.
Born and raised in Needham, Massachusetts, N.C. was the oldest of 4 Wyeth sons, but the first and only painter in the family. His father was a businessman, a grain merchant of old New England stock. His mother, the daughter of Swiss parents.
My grandmother was born in the mountains of Switzerland. When 23 years of age, she tore herself from all her people to follow my grandfather to America. Her longing soul became my mother's inheritance. And I, in turn, have inherited that strange love for things remote, things delicately perfumed with that sadness that is so exquisitely beautiful.
NC had no use for school, and to the great annoyance of his father, spent all the time he could drawing. He was 20 when he set out, with his mother's encouragement, to study with the Dean of American Illustrators, Howard Pyle. As a student, he was notably ambitious, a star performer who was soon illustrating covers for major magazines.
I know I will paint something that will tell someday. Just give me time. I've fully decided what I will do. True, solid American subjects. I have no enthusiasm to see Europe. There are just as great subjects here to paint.
In 1904, when Teddy Roosevelt was president, NC went west to capture the all but vanished life of the cowboy frontier. But as his family grew, he took strictly commercial assignments as well. Readers of periodicals across the country became familiar with his work. But it was book illustrations that gave the fullest rein to his talents and imagination. In time, the sales of the books he illustrated reached more than 2 million.
Right from the very beginning, I spent a great deal of time in the studio, not studying under him, but going out into his storeroom where all these early illustrations were stacked. I would bring them into him, and he was very wonderful about them. He would describe them to me, what they were for. These pictures were something I just fed on, and I'd pore over them. And I asked him once about, I said, how did you pick these subjects? He said, I never paint a subject, an illustration for a story that's described by the author. I take something he hasn't described that may be hinted at, and so I enrich the book.
I think a perfect example of that is the farewell scene in Treasure Island, where the boy is leaving home, and behind him is his mother weeping, which is nothing at all in the book.
Yeah. I mean, he brought life and air into book illustration. Take the one of the death of Edwin from the Scottish chiefs. There's William Wallace looking down on the young man with a shaft driven into his chest. But look at the shape of that moonlight and that hand of William Wallace, delicate, powerful hand there, which is really my father's hand. It's a remarkable, exciting shape.
Do you think he would be surprised if he heard you speaking right now as you are?
No, because I told him that about 4 days before he was killed. I said, you know, Pa, as I always call him, your illustrations, there's no one that can touch you. Howard Pyle was marvelous, but he was of the old school of illustration, and they sit very nicely on the page, as some literary person said to me once. Yes, your father's work is fine, but they jump out of the pages too much. We like an illustration to fit into the text. And your fathers don't do that, and of course that's the whole quality.
Of course, he used to expend a tremendous amount of energy, in particularly his big pictures, where he had to walk up steps to get up to the height of the picture. Then he'd come walk all the way down and come way back to get a look at it.
If you look at that studio, you can almost see the floor worn down where he walked back and forth. If he was doing a fight scene like the one of Bill Bones, he said his muscles were sore because he felt that he'd been in that battle himself.
When he did a man's leg and showed the muscles because he felt it himself and his own leg would hurt because he got so excited about it. When he put a black down, he made a good black. When a man was mad, he made him really mad. I mean, he did it right to the end.
Tom became those men in the tights and the romantic young adventure and the hellion who had the terrible fight in such and such a tavern, you know. He became all of those things. And as a child, when I think of myself lying on my stomach while he walked back and forth with an enormous pallet, I was privileged because there I was in a dream concocted by N.C. Wyeths of something he'd never been abroad, never been in France. He painted France, he painted the Scottish countryside, England, Spain, Russia. And of course, we were always giving shows and doing theater and concocting things.
Costume.
Costume, right. Which, of course, was my father.
He used to read to us when we were younger, of course, things like Dracula and good, exciting horror tales and some of the exciting books of Stevenson.
He'd go to the movies occasionally, you know. Well, quite often, as a matter of fact. Suddenly get it in his head, and we'd all go to the movie.
And how was that?
And he'd drive, and then on the way out, if it were moonlight night, he'd put the lights out on the car and say, "Look, isn't this gorgeous?" You know, you were scared to death. You were going down the road.
We were all just ecstatic about it, the movie. It was Mutiny on the Bounty. Well, we were on the way out with all the people pouring out of the main entrance to the movie theater. And Father, of course, as I said, towered above everybody, but he said, "Come on, kids, come here a minute. Come here. All come over here." And he sort of herded us in, including Mother. Turn around now and look at these people coming out of this theater. And we all watched them. He said, "Did you ever see a duller bunch of faces? Look at those expressions." Turned around, he said, "That's the trouble with movies. They don't leave anything for this. Your imagination goes to sleep." Well, he was entirely right, you know. I mean, when you think about it, reading a book, you get so much more out of it because it's not limited by what's on that cellulose. But I'll never forget that. He was always watching a chance to make a little dig. He thought we were getting a little bit too sold on how terrific this was. Well, it was a good movie. I don't know whether you ever remember it.
It was a marvelous
terrific movie. You know. Well,
how did he like the movie?
He thought it was great. But he took that opportunity. He sort of cut it out from under us, you know. I don't know what the people thought they were going out when he said, "Look at those faces." Well, I couldn't help but remember that at the time, because there again, he was instilling in us the importance of using our imagination.
He had his very serious times. I mean, when he was in almost a gloomy mood, and I always knew it because his coat collar would be left up For some reason or other, it always seemed that way. I always knew he wasn't feeling just right.
As if there were a
As
chill
if there
wind
was
blowing.
something, yes, almost as if he was shielding himself, you know.
He was always yearning for home. You know, those letters repeatedly, these full, long, beautiful, amplified complaints of another horizon that he'd left.
Dear Mama, I have spent the past hour poring over that book of home photographs. Whenever I feel homesick, I fly to that precious book. Why I do it, I know not, for invariably it leaves me in a much more depressed state of mind. A sad longing, a keen and impossible longing for the past.
He had an unusually strong relationship with his mother. Oh, he loved his father, but she was the person who carried the torch for him. He'd open a box, for instance, a Christmas box that would come from his family or from his mother and father, and just opening it and that fragrance of the pine trees in Needham or at their home there, he would just burst into tears, just quietly, you know. Couldn't do a thing.
Dear Mama, whoever placed that bit of green in the box had little idea what a vivid world of the past it would bring into my mind. It touched a spot almost tragic. Spasms went through my whole body. A vague, infinite appreciation of the terrible fact that the past is gone. Gone forever. Dear Mama, today Miss Bacchius and I spent the day in the country. I packed the grub and cooking utensils, and we ate dinner and supper in the woods. Had a most enjoyable day.
He certainly fell in love with her on a sleigh ride. That's what she always told me. She was the cushion right there, you know. The woman in the house, the mother. She would draw things for us. Oh, I mean, but they weren't, she couldn't, you know, just wasn't there. But she was the kind that you could hug her and she'd, if you were tearful or if you were felt badly or something, she was awfully warm and lovable. Of course, very gorgeous as a young girl. Beautiful. She was in all the illustrations as the young women. There's Robin Hood and Maid Marian.
She's your mother.
Was my mother. If you look through those Scribner's classics, there's her face. He always used it. And I don't think she posed for them exactly. I don't think so. Not that I recall. She was too busy.
So she was his idea of the ideal woman.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I don't think that painting, it didn't emotionally move her the way it did the rest of us, but she loved everything that we did. In fact, I'd bring her over here even later years and I'd play her something I'd written. And she'd say, well, you got right through that one.
She was very domestic, you know, and sewed beautifully and stuff. And also let him do what he wanted. I mean, he did what he wanted. If you wanted to go to Maine in the middle of summer or in April, she went. She didn't say don't go. Didn't want to happen to go to Europe. He didn't want to go, didn't go. No, she went right along with him.
He had this built-in concept of women not understanding anything, and that's nonsense. They have perfectly good brains. Individuals do, just like men. And my mother, she always knew when Pa did a good painting, and it drove him crazy because she had no reason. Carol, now what's the matter with it? Oh, I think it's very nice. And then he began striding up and down. I was after such and such, you know. This is what I'm trying to do. And she would absorb all this great load of explanation of a failed painting. But she could, well, now, why don't you like it? Oh, Congress, I didn't say that I didn't like it. But if she came into the studio and sat down and looked at the painting, and just like that, he knew that he'd done it.
When we were married, Carol was such a frail little thing, about 100 pounds. Her eyes were very large and very dark. I paint this brief picture because, ironically, I feel today that she is the bulwark, that I actually lean upon her, and in that stocky, strong figure, I enjoy a real sense of security. I never would have believed it.
My father, right from the beginning, when he saw any talent, would come home from Scribner's and they'd give him piles of paper, a place like that would have it, pencils and stuff all over the place, and watercolors. And if she saw us doing it, she never complained, all over the floor, all over upstairs and everything. No, she'd encourage us.
We were all drawing, one, throw it on the floor, and then tidy up afterwards, of course. But we were always told to use plenty of material, plenty of paint. Now, there's always lots of. And we admired Nat so, because he would take a piece of drawing paper and make little squares all over it, and then draw little neat pictures in each one. We were so admiring. Then one day Pa said, well, Nat won't be an artist. And that was kind of like saying he will never grow up. As far as the Wyeths, if you didn't draw, that was like turning down bread and butter and milk and eating anything.
It's hard to believe, but it started back when I was still taking my naps in a coach on the porch. They had noticed when they would bring me in from taking my nap that my mittens were all dirty and almost greasy, there. So they said, where is he getting all of this, So finally one day they put me to nap in the afternoon. They kept an eye out. And they saw that I would reach over the side of the coach and grab hold of the wheels, and I was able to overcome the brake. And I'd move from one end of the porch to the other, and then I'd move back again. And I would do this several times, And talk about perception. Pa said, I don't know why I should encumber this boy with the name of an artist. I was named after Father for the first, Newell Converse Wyeth. I'm almost certain he's going to become an engineer. Look at his interest in the wheels and turning them and what he's doing. So they changed my name at that time. Changed it to Nathaniel, which was my uncle who was working as an engineer with General Motors. I had a hard time holding my own at a table because 90% of the people at the table were artists. But I remember I'd come home with the damnedest information that I would pick up in various classes. I just started to learn how to use the slide rule. This was before calculators and so on. And I picked out a lot of dumb things too. I made the announcement one night. I said, do you realize that the average automobile driver drives 137 miles a year with his eyes closed? And Father would get so mad because he said, Nat, you've got to stop making these crazy remarks. He said, I wonder why I'm sending you to college. So I got out my calculations. It was duck soup on a slide rule. I figured how long a blink took and what the average driver drove in the way of speed. 137 miles a year with his eyes closed when it was closed. And he sort of looked at the rest of the people sort of with a quizzical smile, And then one night I made the comment, do you know that if you take a silver spoon and put a little water in the bottom of it, we had ice cream this night for dessert, and you put it on the ice cream, you can freeze that just right here in front of us. You can freeze that water into a thin glaze of ice and pick it up. Nat, I'm tired of you making these statements that don't mean a thing, and let's see you back that up. Well, I did it, see. And by pressing on the ice cream, you accelerate the melting, which accelerates the sucking of heat out of the spoon. Froze solid, see? And everybody cheered. Father sort of looked around with that smile of accomplishment. He thought it was great, too, but he wouldn't let me know. But there were many things that I kept, because they were astounding. But I said, you don't realize it, but did you know that you can pop your eyeball out of your eye socket and hang it down here on your chin? And I could see Father, oh, God. Well, I'd heard that it is possible. Don't, you have to be a professional to do it. But the nerve centers and all of the things that are hung on to the eye are long enough so you can take the eyeball out and they'll put it down here on your chin and work on it sometimes if there's some work in the back that they have to do. Oh, God.
It's the most wondrous day of the year for us, Christmas, and is so packed with high-spirited and emotional pleasure. We have succeeded already in tracing a fascinating mystic pattern on the minds of the children, which in time will become an everlasting source of uplifting reminiscence and inspiration. The excitement of impersonating Santa Claus set me crying in pure and exultant joy.
He'd get up on the top of the house and bump around, you know, the way old Chris would, and scare us to death and give us such a thrill. Absolutely wonderful.
I straddled the roof in the dark morning hours, thumping and stamping, ringing a great loop of bells down the bedroom fireplace chimney and calling out in a rumbling voice. My antics were carried out with such seriousness and enthusiasm that at times I felt like bawling.
And I think he got as much out as we did. He was so excited about it. Once up there, he nearly fell off that roof, though. He could have broken both legs. I know how the hell he got up, I guess, by a ladder.
I quickly return after depositing my buffalo coat, mask, and red toque behind the cellar door. And as the dear little kids slowly sense that their dad is in their midst, they excitedly tell me all about Chris, and their eyes grow big as saucers. My own feelings I can never express in words. I only know that the great truth that I was a father, acting this all out for my own family, seemed fantastic. A dream.
And we always wondered why he was always in his bathrobe Christmas morning, and he always looked a little tired. Of course, we never realized he was probably up all night, being old Chris.
Lord, we believed in Santa Claus, or old Chris as we call it. I was 13. Well, at 12 years old, he started giving me lessons on Saturday. And I came up late, and he said, you either are up here on time at 9 till 12, you're wasting my time and your time. You be up here at 9, or that's the end. Walked in, that was it. I was up there. Oh, he was a stern teacher. God, he was really, I don't think today that pupils could take what he would give. I was so damn slow, see, where Andy was much faster, and my sister I had heard, she was really fast. Or yet was so precocious, so intelligent compared to me, intelligentsia. I'm not that she knows I can't spell or anything else. I don't give a damn. But, so I couldn't meet her because she was way beyond me. She was, as I said, reading Tolstoy at 14 and stuff. God, if I read Black Beauty at 20, I was lucky.
My father said, Andy, you've got to keep alive to everything. It's not just a matter of doing it for 2 hours and then forget it. Carry it with you. He actually gave me my first lesson in watercolor. I was doing watercolor out in the orchard next to his studio, and I was rather too careful. And he said, Andy, you want to explode on the thing. And he did this thing very quickly, you know, with great bravado. I mean, that's where he was terrific. When he wanted to, he could let go and show you what a little peach sieve you were, you know.
He got me interested in building model furniture, and I'll never forget my first attempt was a ladder-back chair out of mahogany. And we'd gone over the dimensions of it, and he'd drawn some sketches here and there, and we had some models in the house that I could use. Well, I finished it, my first model, really, that's under his tutelage, you know, and he came out, and he looked at, wow, he said, he took the model and looked it all over, you know. He said, that's great, you know. But very quietly, but with no question, he told me what a lousy job I'd done. But with compassion. He wasn't, he was going to make this count. He left the room, my little workbench, and I remember tears running down my face. They took that chair and put it on the floor and then jumped up and down on it, made it into small pieces, you know. I was so mad, see. I started off again after I had regained my composure. And what a difference. The chair was beautiful. There was no comparison, you know. But what a lesson that taught me.
And such enthusiasm, which he communicated to us all very seriously. Never talked down to us. We were always had to be up here, you know. He also took care of us like a great, wonderful nanny. He was the one who said, I don't think Nat's color is good today, and I think you'd better see Dr. So-and-so. Very sensitive. Do you see why he didn't want us to get away? He would keep us safe, which of course is wrong. You can't.
In 1929, Henriette marries N.C.'s pupil, the talented and athletic Peter Hurd. Against her father's wishes, she leaves with her husband for his home in New Mexico, where they build a ranch in the Hondo Valley, raise a family, and paint, far from Chadds Ford. Her paintings reflect a lifetime of careful observation and warm, sensuous appreciation. Anne's composition, A Christmas Fantasia, is performed by the Philadelphia Orchestra, Leopold Stokowski conducting. She is 19 years old. She, too, marries a pupil of her father's, the painter John McCoy. Nat becomes an inventor and engineer at the DuPont Company. He designs a boat, the Silver Foil, modeled after an airplane wing, in which he attempts to get the same lift on water that a wing gets in the air. When his first child is born, Nat names him Newell after his father. To celebrate his grandson's birthday, N.C. writes a letter.
My dear Newell, almost 60 years of time stand between us. To me, they seem such a brief span of adventure, a mere hint of life and its vast possibilities. The high degree and richness of your youthful dreams will determine the quality of the gratifications to come. So it is that your grandfather, upon your second birthday, feels very happy for you, sends his love and a small remembrance for your bank account.
Carolyn stays at Chadds Ford, living at home with her parents. She develops a powerful style of painting all her own. NC never sends Andy to school. The Brandywine Valley and his father are Andrew Wyeth's education.
I think Andy probably was his great reward. He developed so extraordinarily. Well, he drew from the time he could hold a pencil. And he was never made to do many things. He beautifully behaved. He was barely taught to read and write.
He always said no top-notch artist ever graduated from college. Do you know why? When they should be out in the country or in the city, doesn't matter where they are, soaking up. When you're open, and you are open from 14 on, to gain all your impulses and emotions, as my father did, you're in a schoolroom being held in. After you get over a certain age, you're not susceptible.
Dear Andy, I've had a great feast on your mounted watercolors. They look magnificent, and with no reservations whatsoever, they represent the very best watercolors I ever saw. This remark may not mean much to you, but I believe what I say, and I'm certain I'm right.
I think I was a rather sad thing to him because I think he saw I was just beginning. And I think you can see it in the letters.
My dear Henriette, some of the watercolors that Andy has done in the last few days are acutely abstract. Their impact makes it hard to hold back tears. What magical power that boy has. I am at once stimulated beyond words to new, purer effort, and plunged into black despair.
He was very anxious to be known as a painter, not an illustrator. He apparently separated those two very sharply. And he never felt that he had enough time to devote to becoming a painter.
The last 15, 20 years, I'm just an illustrator.
Dear Andy, the week has been to me a singular mixture of ineffable sadness and inspiration, two moods that often happen together. But there is a persistent melancholy which I seem unable to shake off.
His work was dissatisfied with his work. He didn't come down in a very dull state. You'd talk to him and cheer him up, and I would, but it wouldn't last very long, maybe an hour. He'd be right back in a you just couldn't pull him out.
Could you tell right away if he was in one of his dark
Oh, yes,
periods?
certainly, yeah.
Did he look different?
A portrait of my father is in the Roswell Museum, and I painted that in his studio. There are photographs of me painting it. I painted him exactly as he was, and my mother hated the portrait because it was somewhat ill and gray, with a thoughtful, gentle, forever sad acceptance of his own. He felt that he had failed as a painter. And he was a very sad man, very sad.
Pa would come down from the studio if he'd had a poor day, and he had terrible headaches. I remember him taking Broma Seltzer, pouring it from one cup to the other, and then drink. And he would put on a Beethoven symphony or something and just bury his head almost inside of the loudspeaker. We'd find him just sitting in the dark up in the studio with his hands clasped on his head and just looking at the floor in a very dimly lighted room. Naturally worried us.
I'd sort of almost steer clear of him in a way because I felt it was something he had to work out himself.
My father was always felt deeply about his own weaknesses and wrong directions, and there was a kind of foreboding about him before he was killed.
I don't think he was doing his best work, and I knew it at the time. A very sad time to me, period. I felt it at the time that it was. And his death, of course, drove it home to me.
Uncle Jack, my father-in-law, came out on the porch and said, "You're wanted back home. There's been an accident." Of course, had no idea. He didn't say what. So we turned right around and went back to the house. And I noticed the station wagon wasn't there. That sort of startled me.
On October 19th, 1945, N.C. Wyeth was at the wheel of his Ford station wagon less than a mile from his home. With him in the front seat was his 4-year-old grandson, Newell. As the car crossed a railroad track, it stalled and was hit by an oncoming locomotive. Both NC and the child were killed.
And we're almost certain that he had a momentary heart failure, because he did have a weak heart and had pills with him, in fact. And we tried not to think that that happened, because it sort of left the boy in an unheard of position there. He was in the car and with the driver bent over the wheel. Although the engineer had made the comment that was in the engine that hit the car was that, and so typical of father, he put his arm up as if to stop the locomotive. The little boy we lost, Newell, was our first child, and one that we'd had a hell of a time trying to conceive, and finally this boy came that was just sort of out of the blue. And even at 4 years old, he was listening to symphonies and really loving them. I mean, concertos and so on. And I remember him talking to both my first wife and me about, you must be awfully careful in the automobile with that little boy. Over and over again telling us to be careful, and look what happens. It's, I think the more I see of life, the more I feel that writers are overpaid. My God, when you see what's right in front of you, your own life.
Part of all of us died with him, that's all. But he was the hub in the wheel, the big force. He took care of even when my children were little, if one had a cold and was in bed or something, he'd be right over here with pencils and paper or something. See how they were? He had his finger on everybody.
Everything that happened was sort of being circulated around it and sort of built it up, And you'd get the essence from everything. And that was all gone in a matter of seconds,
I think it had a strong effect emotionally on my work. I think the next picture I did was the one of Carl Kerner, which is really a portrait of my father. Not that Kerner had the sensitivity of my father, by no means, but it was the closest thing I knew to a power.
Had you ever drawn or painted your father?
I did nothing of him of any importance.
Never?
Never. Oh, I made some drawings, but futile, stupid. And I've kicked myself ever since. I think that's another thing. It made me really try to do some portraits that had some meat to them. I think a death or a loss of someone very close to you does something to you that you can't get any other way.
Can you define the different quality?
Well, I came to. I think we were marvelous while we were still very small children. But as we became mature, I think we took from him. I don't think we gave him much then. He was a generous man. He was not a selfish man. And you've got to be selfish to paint. And I think he was selfish up to that point. And then his love for the family finally overpowered him.
You think you were draining him?
Absolutely. It's a terrific drain to him. And an unimportant drain. I know people will say, yes, but you gave him love. Yeah, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the man as a creative genius, which he was. And it's been a driving force to me to try to justify the loss.
Do you feel that?
No, I don't. No, certainly not. Beethoven had a hell of a time with that nephew of his, you know. I don't know, this is human. No, I very much suspect people who aren't abjectly devoted to a few individuals. I want people to love someone almost abjectly, forever. I mean, what is called weakness, I think sometimes is a great strength.
If you could see him now and talk to him, what would you like to say to him?
I would be tempted to talk about, but never would, I'm sure, the accident. Because he had given me so much discussion about the dangers in a car, you know. And it was certainly wasn't done intentionally, and it certainly was something that could have happened to anybody. But the combination of that train probably shocking him to hear that whistle and then stalling and not knowing what the hell to do to get that damn engine back in operation. It was probably just he probably, the old pump probably stopped. And that was it.
I think Andy said it. He said it took a locomotive to kill N.T. Wyeth.
In fact, I had a dream that I had met my father, met Pa again. I remember shaking his hand and telling him, you don't know how great a person you were. I remember he was embarrassed. And I tried to make him realize what I kept shaking his hand, and that woke me up. I was shaking the covers, you know.
The day after I learned of his death, people that I was with had a wonderful garden, and they had masses of chrysanthemums. And I said, well, Pa would like me to paint right away. And so I went up. I found that I was painting better than I knew how. Oh, I said, it just can't be true. But do you know, I kept feeling him say, now, Henriette, do this way, and remember about that, and get the air between the petals, you know. I could have sworn he was talking to me over my shoulder. Now, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? And this flower thing is one of the finest, best I've ever done. I constantly think of him as how I look at something, the grass, these rocks, the texture of that thing. Everything is important.
My art vanishes into the merest speck when suffered comparison to the one divine and tangible sensation bequeathed to us. Parent to child, child to parent.
I hope to God when I die, I know I'm going to, I want to savor the very last moment. Don't get me snuffed out in an accident with my little Mercedes or anything like that. Oh, I want to know. I want to know it's coming. I want to review what I've had.
I now realize how intensely I have been living through my family. It was as though I had 6 live points of contact with life instead of 1. My imagination is on fire. The universe towers in my mind, a great overpowering mystery. The significance of the tiniest speck of bark on the pine tree assumes the proportions of the infinite sky. My brain almost bursts with the effort to really appreciate the meaning of life, of existence. I ardently promise with all my soul to do my best to make my short life of use. to add an infinitesimal mite to the world.
Smithsonian World is brought to you by a company that's bringing the world closer together through leadership in communication. For business, for home, for today and tomorrow. Southwestern Bell Corporation.
This program is also made possible by the James S. McDonnell Foundation of St. Louis, which supports significant programs in education, research to improve human life, and global understanding. Additional funding is provided by this and other public television stations and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. To order video cassettes of this program or a reading list of related material for educational use, call 800-552-1922 or write We Divisions, Post Office Box 6134, Arlington, Virginia, 22206.